Good evening, everyone. We're still working on technology, and I think we have it this time. So just bear with us. We have a very nice person, Jill, who's offered to help us and came here all the way from Palatine to get us going on these hybrid meetings, and it's not on. That's for the room. Well, they can't hear me. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know about this, but let me look. No, probably not.
Oh,
It is. It's quiet.
Oh, it's okay. I just wasn't, am I not talking into it? Oh, okay. All right. Sorry.
There you go.
Okay, my name is Kimberly Haig and I'm with Wild Ones of Greater Kane County. We just have a few little housekeeping things before we get going. I just wanted to tell you that our next our last under our feet presentation for the
Well,
season.
good luck. Try not to go for 60 this time.
Okay.
All right. At least if it's 60, come back with some yarn.
Could everybody please mute these?
I love Fred's stash.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh?
Is your dog in?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay. There you go. April 18th on Zoom, and it's going to be a panel called Soil at My House with Gary Swick, Corey Bagalka, and Stacy Zuber. Please tune in. It'll be wonderful. Upcoming in April, we have our 6 spring ephemeral walks. You can go to our Facebook page or our last newsletter about the dates. It's April 8th, April 15th, 16th, 23rd, and 26th. So please join us. You don't have to sign up. You just come. The only thing that will cancel is lightning. Then we don't do it. So roundtable discussions started last Monday, and they will go on all through April and until May 1st. And we had a wonderful time last Monday when Jean and Nancy and Morgan talked about native plants in the area. And the next 5 of them is going to be open to you, to any of you, experienced, non-experienced. We're all going to discuss native plants, what we love about them and what we hate about them, if we do. Okay, but please come and bring your questions. It's a great time. Our plant sale will be May 13th from 9 to 2 at Gray Willows Farm in Campton Hills. We are partnering this year with Campton Township Open Space, so they're our partner. We are also going to be selling, not by us, 2 other vendors are going to be selling herbs and vegetable starters, so please come to that. We are going to have, after we finish our spring ephemeral walks, we're going to have pop-up walks in the next end of the summer and into the fall. So we're asking for your input to give us information. If you want to have us come to your house for a pop-up walk, if you think there's some neighborhood places you like us to come to, if you think there's some great forest preserves or natural areas, please email us at gkwildones@gmail.com or just respond on Facebook if you want and let us know. We'd love to have your participation and know what kinds of things you would like to do for walks. And the last thing will probably sound a little strange, but if anyone has any ideas of good food trucks in the area, not for me, it's for us. We're thinking of food trucks at some of our events. So if you know of any good food trucks, because I couldn't right now at the area, just email.
Well, I have the pleasure of introducing Ken. Ken has been growing food, I understand, pretty much all your life, right, Ken? Ken and I became friends, I would say probably when we both, can't hear me. Is it muted again?
Yeah, that
I'm
microphone's just set really
Pretty
low.
much close to it. Can you hear me now? That better? Okay,
We can hear you fine
okay.
online.
Ken and I served on a board together in McHenry County, the McHenry County
You're muted again. You're muted. There it goes. Now you're okay.
So Ken managed a 100-acre park, managing the native animals that were there and in the process of converting that park to native landscaping as well. So he's been in among us Illinoisans for 15 years and has delved into the native planting, the thing that we all love and are wanting to do. And so he has a lot of tips for us tonight, and it's a delight to introduce you, Ken, and have you speak to the rest of us. Thanks.
What do I now hit the green button now?
Yep.
All right. No.
And you just hit the share button on the right. It's on the wrong
I-
one. Do that. There
You
you go.
hear it.
Okay, great.
All set.
Well, thank you, June. Yeah, I didn't manage the zoo. I managed the horticulture in the zoo. Other people dealt with the animals, except on Christmas, then I helped them. Anyway, this is a presentation that I put together a couple of years ago in collaboration with West Cook Wild Ones. They wanted kind of an overview presentation of just a lot of different topics to start off a series of presentations they were going to have. And I put this one together. We just threw out that name, Top 10 Things. So it's basically top 10 things I feel like talking about today. And the biggest one that I love to start with all the time is, where do I do it? Oh, okay. It's going to take me a while to figure out this iPad, this computer thing I'm using. Yeah, it's wonderful to work with these things. I mean, I walk out my driveway one day, getting in my car to go to work, and I look down and see that. And this is prairie smoke. I've lived closely with prairie smoke for, quite a few years. I've only seen this once. This is really a special day. I got to see that. This is a third-year garden. They don't keep looking like that. And there are reasons for that. And there are methods to try to preserve them to where they will keep looking more like that. But third-year garden where you still have space between the plants and you haven't filled in, the plants haven't filled in. These prairie plants, they want to be belly to belly, root crown to root crown. That's the way they grow. So they add more plants to fill in between, unless we do. And so they look cluttered after a couple of years, but a 5, 6, 7-year-old prairie garden usually doesn't stop traffic. But it's pretty wonderful when they do. And they, you get to interact with all the little critters that Dr. Wilson's little critters that run the world. Yeah, all kinds of flying stuff. The bumblebees, bumblebees don't go home at night. They really don't have a home. And so when the sun goes down or it gets too cold, they just sit there until it's warm enough or light enough. And in October, when you have those nice, long, cool mornings, little kids love it to go out there, and because they're the same height as the flowers, and they have those little tiny fingers, and they love to pet bumblebees because they're really soft, and a little kid can really appreciate how soft they are. Great stuff. Aphids, these are like Skittles without the food additives for insects. When I see something get overrun with aphids, often early in the season milkweeds. This is swamp milkweed. I celebrate because I know of all the different creatures that these help to survive. They harvest energy out of these aphids. So I know they're showing up and that they're hunting other things and they're reproducing. And our garden at home is about 10 years old. And for the first few years, we always had this early in the season. I haven't seen an aphid in 5 years. I don't know, quite a while. But it doesn't happen anymore. It balanced out. But it's always a good thing when they show up because, you know, they're bringing in their friends and their enemies. Butterflies, you know, get a lot of press. Keep in mind, there are 15 times as many moth species as there are butterfly species. So if we're trying to do things that help butterflies for other reasons, you know, we need to keep that in mind, that we're dealing with moths too here. And butterflies, you know, they go through the different life cycles. This is the beginning of the part of the talk that is also called the Gospel according to Doug Tallamy. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the gospel, but so I'll try to get through it pretty quick. But they go through different stages of life cycle. The one on the right there just came out of that chrysalis. It hasn't even flown, pumped its wings up all the way yet. And before that, they're caterpillars. And caterpillars are really significant in two ways. One, they can only eat things that they co-evolved with, which pretty much means native plants. And some are very specific, like monarchs and milkweeds. Some are much more generalist. There's a lot of variation in there, but they're host specific and they're the main food for baby birds. Most of our songbirds feed their babies almost nothing but caterpillars. And a pair of chickadees, which weigh 1/3 of an ounce each, they're going to lay probably 6 or 7 eggs. It'll take them from the day they hatch. It'll be about 17 days till they leave the nest. And in that 17 days, that pair of 1/3 of an ounce birds are going to need to catch thousands of caterpillars. They can't be going down the block. They have to be getting these close to home. And mostly on woody plants. Our prairie gardens, as beautiful as they are, don't have all that many plants that are really supplying caterpillars the way an oak tree does. You know, oak trees are just fabulous for this. And these numbers are conservative. So you know, of course, those aren't my pictures. Those are Dr. Tallamy's. If you haven't read this stuff, do. If you've read one of them and not the other, read the other one. As far as I'm concerned, every moment I spent trying to figure this stuff out without just reading his work was kind of wasted because it's all spelled out so beautifully. And the root systems, which we know are very deep, they're composed of woody, long tap roots, and also a lot of fibrous roots. And in the wintertime, when the top of the plant dies back, those fibrous roots die back also, leaving that decomposing material in the ground, which turns it into a sponge. So our stormwater can be processed in the ground instead of on top of the ground, the way we've taught it to do. This is a new idea around here. Water never used to run on top of the ground. We taught it how to. And also all that organic matter in the soil is carbon-based. So this is carbon sequestration. And the research very, very clearly shows that the carbon stays there in the ground as long as it's not disturbed. This is going to be an ongoing theme in this talk about, in a garden, we don't disturb the soil. There's an old story that we all grew up with, or many of us anyway, about people living in a garden. And we don't remember a lot of the details in this story, but it says at the very beginning that they had an easy life and the soil wasn't tilled. It specifies that. And at the end, when their life is a lot harder and they have to work to serve the soil, then the soil is tilled. That's a big difference. So how do we get the soil to serve us like it says at the beginning of that soil? Well, the microbes do that. The plants take sunlight, they make sugar, they take 1/3 of that sugar and feed it to the microbes. The microbes metabolize the sugar coming out the root tips. They metabolize the sugar and it's taken up by the plants as plant growth hormones. I was taught when I took botany that these hormones were produced in the root tips, but no, the root tips exude the sugar. The microbes produce the hormones. They're taken up by the plant. All this stuff works together, and it's pretty wonderful. Enough wonderfulness. Okay, site evaluation. A lot of people are going to tell you, get a soil test, do this, do that, find out, you know, what's your soil like? My basic question is, does anything grow there? If you're trying to plant a prairie garden, if anything grows there, prairie will grow. You know, prairie came in after the glaciers when this was a rubble pile, built these incredibly rich, deep soils. If anything will grow, don't worry about the details, how wet it is, how dry it is, but because prairie is going to grow. Ask simple questions. Does anything grow? Is it buried? Is it sunny or is it shady? These, you know, and what kind of shade? Is it a locust tree with filtered light, or is it just a building, you know, and dark shade, in which case you might not be able to find much that'll grow there. Is it wet or dry? This is interesting. A lot of plants like buttonbush, red twig dogwood, swamp milkweed, bald cypress that we think of as wetland plants because we find them in nature growing in wet places. They're very drought tolerant. These things they evolved through periods of time when there were droughts that lasted for decades or even longer, and they survived. They're incredibly drought tolerant. The reason you find them in these wet places is they have a low need for oxygen to their roots. They can take it where it's wet. There's no oxygen to the roots. Most plants need more oxygen. So these outcompete in wet places, but they can take the dry. They can also take compacted soil, because that's the problem with compacted soil. And there's no oxygen in it and the microbes and the roots all need oxygen. So that's why these plants work great. Prairie plants work great in rain gardens. They can stand living in a puddle for a short time, and they can take it when it doesn't rain all summer. They're tough. They're tough. Is it steep? Is it flat? Please pay attention to which way is south. I can't tell you I've worked in the landscape industry around here, and I drive someplace and it's a curvy road, and I get there, it's cloudy, you can't tell. And I start talking to the people and they don't have any idea which way their house faces, and they want to have a garden. It's great. You know, so, you know, you can have to have flowers, you got to have sun. It's just that simple. You can get flowers in a woodland early in the year because there aren't any leaves on the trees yet. You can get all kinds of pretty things. But once those woods leaf over later on in the summer, you're never going to get anything like that. But there are some things that'll live on the edges. The spiderwort that you see in the foreground, that'll tolerate some shade. So it'll some shade, and these purple cone flowers are actually a plant of the forest edge more than they are a prairie plant, and they'll tolerate some shade. And if you want to beat me up for the picture of a cultivar here, we can do that later. So just use the plants that are adapted. Look at the site, go out in nature, experience plants, find out what they are. If you see something pretty, learn how to identify it, and learn which plants live in sites like your site and use those plants. They've figured it out. They've been working on this for a long time, and we just got involved. And if we just ask them the questions instead of ourselves, we get along. Things work out a lot better. But you have to do some designing. Because I advocate, you know, typical suburban house, yard, people have functions for the backyard. They have dogs, they have kids, they have toys. The front yard's just there to look at. Well, let's give them something to look at, you know? Why just that green carpet thing? So you want to make a native garden look intentional, and you want it to be easy to maintain. Now, what do I mean by look intentional? Well, look like somebody did that on purpose. You know, we're all kind of hardwired that one point in I talk about evolution a lot. At one point in our evolutionary past, we if we look at a landscape and we don't understand what we're looking at, we don't know if there's a saber-toothed tiger in there that's going to eat us. And you don't want to scare your neighbors with your landscape. And so you want it to look like you did it on purpose. And how do you do that? How do you do that? You can't do it by taking a cookie cutter out into the prairie and taking a piece of the most sublimely beautiful thing you ever saw in your life and chunking it down in your front yard. It just won't be that pretty anymore. You have to do things like plant in big globs. They have fancy words, swaths and drifts, but when you have clumps of color together, and not just color, texture, shape, form, when you have these clumps together, it adds intentionality to your design. And whoops, darn. Oh no, how do you go back? Yes, here we go. And yeah, when you have repeating elements, of certain, repeating elements, it creates a cohesion to the thing. This is a pretty messy looking garden, but because of the repetition of the yellow and the repetition of the pink, it makes it look a little more coherent. This is a shady garden that I think is really pretty because it has the big clumps of different shapes, different textures, different shades of green. It has a few flowers, but not very many because it's just too shady. But the other thing about, I used to get paid, the company I worked for got paid for me to stop there once every 2 weeks on a route that I was driving, maintaining planting beds. I would get here, I would seldom even clock in any time. I would just take a break, tell my helper, hey, come see how you do it right, and walk them around this place, how beautiful it was, and there were never any weeds. And I never truly understood why there weren't any weeds. And then I saw a presentation by a guy named Thomas Rayner, who with his collaborator, Claudia West, wrote this book that Doug Tallamy calls the Universal How-To Guide to Sustainable Landscaping we have all been waiting for. And I take those words seriously. That's good stuff. They talk about a lot of things, but I'm going to focus on planting in layers. They say start off with existing trees, big structural things, a gazebo, even your house is part of the structural layer of your property. And then you work off of that and lay underneath that swaths and drifts and other kinds of globs of things that bloom at different points during the season so that you get this progression of blooms moving around so that it's kind of a tapestry that continually changes through the season, but you have them in clumps. And then underneath of all that, you underplant everything with cool season ground covers, native ground covers, things that don't get more than a few inches tall. And what these do, most of our weeds are cool season Eurasian agricultural weed. They came over in bags of grain that were going to be planted. And they grow everywhere and they start the year early so they can get ahead of our warm season crops. So we get in there ahead of them with cool season native ground covers. And it prevents them. And it also prevents other volunteer plants from coming up and helps kind of lock in your composition, hold it in place. So what are these plants? Some examples: the sedges are essential for the hydraulic cycle around here. This time of year, for the next month, how long is it till the oak trees leaf out? A month? Yeah. In that month, the ground can be really wet, and those oak trees, the roots can start drowning because they have no idea how to process the water. But the sedges, oak sedge, Carex pennsylvanica that you see here, growing underneath it, they are flowering. Flowering takes more water than anything else a plant does. So they're pumping water out of the ground, putting it in the air during the wettest time of year. In the summer, they're completely dormant. They just sit there, and every night they collect dew. They put it in the ground. I have a friend who plants food forests in North Lawndale. She always underplants with sedges, and she waters less than she used to. So yeah, this is pen sedge. Sedges, you have to be careful. There are some that are too aggressive. We'll address one of those later on. I recommend, if you just Google Mount Cuba sedge trial, it's specifically sedges for the Mid-Atlantic state, but all the ones that they recommend in that thing are grown around here, grown frequently around here. So, because you can make mistakes with sedges, but you want them short and not too aggressive. Pussy toads that you see, this is in May when it's blooming. You see how densely that covers the ground. You're not going to get any weeds. This is living mulch. There's just going to be no weeds whatsoever. The purple poppy mallow is more of a, it doesn't bloom early in the season, but when the snow melts off, there's a rosette, a green rosette there. Might be a foot across, and that's a square foot that you, well, it's not a full square, that you aren't going to have any weeds in. It holds everything else out. Later on the year, it goes crazy and blooms like nuts, but it works for preventing weeds early in the season. Robin's plantain. This plant is not real aggressive, but you can divide it aggressively and cover a lot of ground over a few years with just a minor purchase, because it does divide easily. In May, it puts on these little, usually they're whiter than that, little flowers that you might end up having to cut the flower stems off in June or July. But it is native around here in woodland, but tolerates sunlight very well. Our violets are great. They these aren't all Sororia. This is an area at our house that was kind of shady, and we just put some large native shrubs and small trees in there, and they shaded out the grass. We did no site prep whatsoever here. They shaded out the grass, and the violets took over, and the creeping Charlie, but eventually got choked out or shaded out. Anymore in this area, the violets have gotten thinned out because it's gotten a little too shady. So we've started putting in the Canada wild ginger, which forms a very dense mass. You don't get any weeds with this stuff. But this is my favorite. This is prairie smoke, which just forms these great, they're just starting to bloom right now. The vegetation isn't more than 3 inches tall. The flowers stand up another few inches. Here it is in April when daffodils are blooming. Here it is in June when penstemons are blooming. And you can see in the foreground, there's a geranium there. And let me see, I got a mouse. Yeah, there's a geranium there, which will get some decent height to it. And then over here, this is scarlet bee balm. And what this does is it creates an area between these two taller plants that's short. And that creates a definition, legibility to the composition. Didn't mean to do that. Yeah, promotes the legibility of the composition, stays short. And also later in the season, when everything else is tall, those pathways where the prairie smoke is, that's where I walk when I work in the garden. I don't walk out there very much. They'll take a little bit of it. You don't want to take a bunch of school kids through there on a regular basis, but they'll take some of that. So a nice list of good, cool season native ground covers. The wild strawberries are great. They're delicious. Allegheny spurge is our native Pachysandra. It's actually native farther east than this, but it's really pretty kind of Pachysandra that could be used in a more formal setting. I recommend people work with it. And the violets and the sedges like we talked about. But other plants that do cover well early in the season, penstemons, when the snow melts off, there's a rosette there. There's no weeds coming up underneath that rosette. Our heuchera, native alum root, same deal. That rosette can be almost a foot across. Golden Alexanders are just so aggressive in the spring that they can that they outcompete the weeds. You might, on a young garden, want to deadhead this plant because it might get too aggressive from seed. The purple poppy mallow we talked about, prairie dropseed. It's not green at all in the spring, but the previous year's foliage covers the ground around it. Don't mess with it. Just leave it there. It's mulched. If you've got a few, flower stems, seed stems sticking up, you can cut those down, but leave the rest of it alone. The monardas put on such aggressive growth early in the year that they suppress weeds. Geraniums, they grow just because they grow early. And the Virginia bluebells, you know, they in the right setting, because after they bloom, they disappear completely. So you can have other things that come up into the spaces later in the season. And these things, you can mix these ground covers, and that gives you more shapes of root systems going into the ground closer together and creating more of that good business under the ground. And think of your composition like a Persian rug, where from a distance, you see the big bold patterns and you go, wow, look at that. You get closer and closer, and as you get closer and closer, you really enjoy the detail work. And you can do that using these plants this way. And research shows that up close, the human eye really delights in detail. It just thinks that is just the greatest thing on earth. And it is. Okay, preparing a garden, getting it ready to plant. Your soil is probably fine. We're not talking about amending the soil. You're not going to have to. There are exceptions. We can talk about them later. This is about killing stuff. If all you got to kill is turf grass, you're in luck. It's barely alive to start with. And turf grass that's been chemically treated to where it's just turf grass and no persistent weeds like dandelions, man, that's really easy to kill. It's just on the edge. Landscapers, what they like to do is cut it and haul it off. I don't like to remove organic matter from my property. So I have, and you know, what I do, I'll, on a small area, I'll cut the sod, flip it over, chop it up, and just do that for a few weeks. And after a while, it's dead. This was a little herb garden my wife wanted, and you'll see it later. The smothering methods do work for turf grass, for creeping Charlie, for clover, for shallow rooted stuff. But you see the dandelions there in the grass, that putting down the, when that newspaper rots away, those things come right up through the wood chips. It's not going to hurt them a bit. But it is good for killing turf grass. The black plastic method works. Again, you want to leave it all summer, put it on in May, take it off in September, maybe when it's going to rain, and let it get a rain on it, and you'll get a new flush of weeds, and you can put it back on and kill them, you know, before you plant in maybe October. But it won't kill everything. I tried it on Lily of the Valley one time, and it was hysterical how vigorous those things are when you pulled the plastic off. They were almost jumping up and down. I'm so happy to see us. I don't advocate using chemicals, but this was an acre that we were transforming to prairie. So it does work. Glyphosate applications will kill turf grass. So that's the easy stuff. And then there's everything else. We've all run into these plants. We all know them. We all hate them with different parts of our souls. Goutweed, you know, that stuff. Boy, that's hard to kill. All these traditional landscaping ground covers, and even hostas and daylilies can be tough to kill. I used to get paid as a herbicide applicator to, you know, come up with tank mixes that I could in one application kill all this stuff. And, you know, it doesn't work. There's so many different methods that you can try, and they don't work. But you will notice I had goldenrod up there. So I just want to say a word about goldenrod, because yeah, see here, I mentioned Canada goldenrod, and goldenrods are essential here in Elgin. I think there are 120 different species of caterpillar that can eat goldenrod. Their late season, heavy, sticky pollen does not cause allergies. It's essential for insects late in the season. It's really important, but some goldenrods grow by rhizomes, these underground stems. And I'm not even sure if this is Canada, Missouri, tall, which one it is. I could care less. When I see a new goldenrod that I'm not familiar with, I pull it out of the ground. And if it has those underground stems, then I kill everyone like it I can find. If it doesn't have those, then it's fine. And this is just a young plant, a few months old, It's already got a foot span on the rhizomes and very innocuous looking thing. You wouldn't know it was evil. But in a couple of years, this thing's gonna have hundreds of rhizomes and it'll be an infestation that you never get rid of. And so you have to be careful with goldenrods, but you want them, but you know, you don't want all of them. Doug Tallamy did tell me one time that it keeps, they have a stilt grass in the east. That's an annual grass that progresses. And he said that they can make a dense enough barrier with Canada goldenrod that the stilt grass won't come through it. So it has value. Other rhizomes, this is quackgrass. You know, if you're trying to dig those out, you got to get every little piece of rhizome. If you're digging around and you see these white, you know, things, then you know there's something there. It's still got a lot of energy below that point and it can probably sprout back. You're going to have to get more of it out, whatever it is. And all that is more soil disturbance, which equals more weeds. So, and more disruption of all our friends, hardest workers in your garden. So this mess was my next door neighbors. And it had almost that whole list of plants that I showed you, they're almost all in here. It was incredible. And the property line's on the right side of the picture, and you can see all that stuff. My stuff's trying to creep in, their stuff's trying to creep into my place. And I talked to the neighbor because I'd heard about a method that I thought might work. From a woman named Linda Chalker Scott from Washington State. And the trick is that when you find a tree crew working in your yard, in your neighborhood with a chipper, when you hear when your walls start shaking because there's a chipper around the corner, go over and make sure that they're cutting live wood, not dead wood, live green wood, and ask them if they need a place to dump. And in most cases, they'll say, sure. Don't call the office. They'll have another truck come from 60 miles away and come dump in your yard. You know, talk to these guys walking around the corner, working around the corner, and have them come dump right on top of it and spread it out about 1.5 feet thick. And it just builds this oven on top of, and as the plants continue to send up new growth into this oven, they continue to die and it wears them out. And I did this in the summertime of 19. I did this in the summer of 19. And the next spring, there were a few things that came up. And I would either pull them out or hoe them out, and they ran out of energy and quit, except for the field bindweed, which can have and we all get that, right? It can have a 30-foot root system, and it just has so much energy, it just keeps regenerating. So I got another load of wood chips, put another foot on top of it. And last year, 2022, I didn't see any bindweed all summer in this area. It's over in my yard because it escaped over there before, but it's not in here anymore. So it's a really effective method, but it takes time. And, you know, here I am 4 years into this site prep, and next year I'll, you know, be ready to start planting, moving stuff from my yard over here. But if you have a really serious problem in a space, you don't want to just get in a hurry to get plants in the ground. You want to make sure it's dead before you put the plants in the ground, or there's going to be problems, and it's going to plague you forever. And you want to be able to spend time enjoying your garden, not fighting with it. Okay, so patience takes time if you're going to do that. Okay, so planting. First thing I do towards planting a garden, yeah, you want them small. First thing I do is I live in McHenry, and in the fall, if you put your leaves out on the street, the city will come pick them up for you, unless I get there first. I dump them out in my driveway and mow them up. And the pile in the right there is twice as many leaves as the pile on the left. And then I can use these as a mulch for different things. But I advocate when you're going to plant an area, put leaves, old leaves of whatever sort you got, out a couple inches on top of the soil, and then lay out your plants. And you want small plants. Think of those were all gallons. How much potting soil you just bought? There's no reason, you know, small plants. That way, small plants, small hole. Small hole, less disturbance, fewer weeds, right? So a really nice way to, when you put these in, you want to totally cover the plug. Herbaceous plants can be a little bit low. Woody plants cannot, but herbaceous plants can be a little bit low. You want to be sure to cover the top of the plug completely. And augers are really nice for making the holes. This is a gas powered auger. At home, I have this thing I picked up for a few bucks at the home improvement store, the big box store. But so you make little holes. And here's a tree. Trees, like I said, have to be the same height they were before or a little bit higher. Now, this is an oak tree that I'm transplanting. You see the nice taproot. People always get really excited about taproots, and they're essential for the survival of the tree for its first few years. But what's going to sustain this tree for decades, hopefully centuries to come, is the horizontal roots near the surface of the ground. And the more of those there are, the more vigorous the plant will be. They've dug them up, and repeated studies always show the higher the number of horizontal roots in the first few inches under the soil line, the more vigor. And so this one, you can see I actually cut slots in the sod in different places to run these roots through, to lay them out there. So the horizontal roots are the important thing. The nursery trade, on the other hand, buys in their stock in what they call liners, which are little skinny tubes that make the roots go straight down. And I can't tell you how many workshops, lectures, demonstrations I've been to on what to do with one of these store-bought plants to make it to where when you put it in the ground, it's going to survive. In most cases, they're not. 20, 30 years in the landscape industry, that's victory. That you win 20, 30 years. That's a long lead feature, but that's not what we're after. We're after like forever features, as long as we can get them to live. So it turns out that a tree root, if you take a tree root and you cut it off, it'll sprout out at that point where you cut it off. But if you let it grow out into the air to where the end of it desiccates and dies, then back the whole length of the tree root, it grows new fibrous roots and starts all over again. And so different containers have been designed to take advantage of that and create these fibrous root systems that you can just put in the ground and the roots will just take off, and you'll have, scores of horizontal roots in the first few inches under the ground, and very vigorous trees. Darn, I can't see this. So on the right is that kind of container, plant grown in that kind of container. On the left is typical stuff. This, you can clean that up, you can cut things off, and again, 20, 30 years, maybe it'll be just happy as can be, but it's not going to be a long-lived feature in the landscape. The one on the right will. There are different kinds of these air root pruning containers. And we want to plant trees and shrubs, either bare root or grown in these containers. They're only grown by specialty growers, but we're really lucky around here because the guys that run Possibility Place have been using these containers since they were kids. Their dad, Connor Shaw, got on this when it first came out, and really, a blessing that we have him. And Majestic Oaks up by Spring Grove, they supply to a lot of plant sales and forest preserve districts and stuff like that. They good people growing a good product at a reasonable price, wholesale only. So, yeah. So you want to water plants in immediately after planting, and you don't want to make gardening an aerobic activity. Move around. Don't stand in one place. All you're doing is driving the oxygen out of the soil when you stand there with a hose and drown a spot. You want to be spraying, moving around, spraying, go take a break, come back, spray some more, lightly, settle everything in. Don't be fooled by, if you're planting and it's supposed to rain, then water, please. get everything moist. When the rain comes, it's carrying gases, nitrogen and oxygen, which are both good for plants. And if the soil's dry, that stuff airs out. But if everything's wet, then it just gets absorbed into the ground. It works better that way. And just keep in mind, some of these plants, you plant a plant, you water it in. You want to water each individual plant enough that it settles the soil down a little bit around it, but not too much more than that. And some of these things you might plant it, and then we might get rainy weather for a while, and you might never water it again. Expectations. This is a second-year planting. Recently mulched with old composted leaves in April. And then here it is in June. So that's just a second-year planting. That's pretty nice to have that much growth happen that quickly. I'd like to point out there's chunks of wood laying around. The wood chips I used to kill the turf was from a willow tree that on the property that I killed and chipped up, but some of the pieces were too big for the chipper. Leave leave chunks of wood laying around. All kinds of things use them for life. This is a sphinx moth. All kinds of things. We've got a dead tree in our yard. We just realized chickadees are nesting in this year. This is the same garden another year later. They really do come along fast the first few years. But this picture shows something you have to expect is that you're going to screw up. And you see this grassy looking stuff in the foreground? That is palm sedge. And it's messy looking. I loved it at first couple of years, and then it just got messier and messier, and we kept planting other bigger things in it that would kind of stand up and and it just continued to look like an amorphous green blob. It was really frustrating. And so finally, the summer of 2018, I started digging these up, and most sedges dig up pretty easy. This is an exception. They're really tough. I still find them around, that were in the compost pile. They're incredibly tough, and dug them all up. Had a lot of empty spaces in my garden that really looked pretty bad. But then that fall was when I saw Thomas Rayner, and he talked about the cool season ground covers. And you can see off to the right here, there's some prairie smoke. I had clumps of prairie smoke scattered all through. You couldn't see them. And so I went home from that talk, and the next weekend I dug up all my prairie smoke and divided it and planted it in all the places that have been palm sedge. And that's how that happened, accidentally. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to eventually, at some point, you're going to realize you have too many plants, and you have to do a process called editing. And it's heartbreaking. It's really hard. It's one of the hardest things to learn is to edit. The biggest issue in my yard for editing, we have a couple of tall white asters that came in on their own. They're welcome, 3 or 4 of them at the end of the season are really nice big ones, but I'm pulling those things out of the ground all the time. You can get them pretty shallow rooted. You can get them out of the ground. And also common milkweed, we never planted. It came in on its own, got a little overly aggressive for a while. So we came up with a method where whatever comes up in the spring, we're happy to see them. And and we love the blooms. And once they're done blooming, I'll just go through looking very carefully. And if I find eggs or caterpillars, I leave those. And the ones I don't find them, I consider that an editing decision made by the butterflies for me. I appreciate it. And I just pull them out. And they're connected by pretty big rhizomes, but when you pull one out, they don't try real vigorously to come back. And you do it a couple of times and they'll pretty much leave you alone. You still have to pay attention. The other thing you have to expect is that your friends will stop coming to see you because you always fill their cars with plants, and it gets to be an issue. Maintenance, which is basically watering and weeding. I don't have a lot to say about watering, except mainly you don't want to do it very much. I haven't watered my front yard in 4 or 5 years. Usually by the time we start thinking, oh, it's looking pretty tough out there, maybe we should, and then we look at the forecast, it's going to rain in a couple days. We have watered some of the woody plant material because we don't want to lose that. In extreme drought, we'll water the woody plant material. New gardens, you're talking evenly moist, not really wet, because you don't want to drive the oxygen out of the soil. When things are too dry or too wet, the roots die and the plant wilts. You don't know which one it was until you dig a soil knife in. A lot of people tell me, oh man, it rained all night last night, and their garden's bone dry. They rolled over in the middle of the night and heard it raining. But the garden's bone dry. You have to dig into the soil if you want to know if it's wet or not. Irrigation switches have this magical thing called an off switch. I recommend using those. They can be handy to have one if there's a pre-existing irrigation system. It can be handy to use it to turn on to water for a length of time, turn it back off. Don't expect it to understand when your garden needs water again. Remember about the oxygen. And weeds, Prairie petunia, Borrelia humilis, I believe. Love this plant. I've loved it for decades. We brought it into our garden and found out that it was just didn't play well with others, especially around the edges. And I like the edges to be kind of neat, and it was just making a mess of the edges. So I decided to start removing it. And I had a surprise in store for me, because the only part of that plant that you're looking at is the crown, right there where the roots and the stems come together. You can cut that off a 1/4 inch below the crown, leave all those fibrous roots in the ground. You don't need to get any of those out. You don't need to disturb the soil any more than that. And with most plants, the crown is right at the surface. And you can take a spade or a soil knife and just slice right underneath the crown, and you've got it. For plants with fibrous root systems. But this one, that crown was 3 or 4 inches deep. It was really a lot of work getting those things out of there. And we're always going to have them. There's seeds in the garden. We're always going to have them. I don't mind a few, but they're always going to be, when I'm working in a spot and there's one there, I will dig it out. Things with tap roots, on the other hand, you need to get as much of that tap root out of the ground as you can, or it will sprout back. And if you've got a situation where you've got something like a prairie dock or a compass plant in the ground and you want to get rid of it, too bad. I mean, unless you've got a backhoe, those things, they will keep coming back. I've tried a lot of different methods. Some weeds are just so persistent that we need to make our peace with them. These guys, if you can keep Creeping Charlie out of your garden, hallelujah. Don't accept plants from people who have Creeping Charlie in their gardens unless you leave them in quarantine for 6 months, make sure there's none. But once you have it, you're not going to win. It's just not going to happen. It's coming back. So when it's in your way, get rid of it, but don't let it make you crazy. You want to spend your time enjoying your garden, not being neurotic about it. There are good reasons. If something's just ugly, if it ruins the legibility of the composition, if it's about to produce a lot of seeds, or if it's a plant that grows aggressively by underground rhizomes, then you want to get it out of there. Something like quackgrass, I used to try to track the quackgrass rhizomes down and get them all the way out. And I can't tell you how many times I successfully did that and was absolutely sure I had them all, and it never worked. So anymore, when I see quackgrass, I just rip it off at ground level and don't disturb the soil anymore, because it's not accomplishing anything. Sometimes you have to accomplish something, but if it's not going to accomplish anything, don't worry about it. And there's all kinds of bad reasons, things that I tell you, when I'm gardening a public place where people are emotionally invested in every plant on the property, you learn a lot of baggage that people bring to these and to making bad decisions, because there were plants that I needed to get rid of there were bad decisions when they were put in, but they were very important to people. The emotions try to keep them out of the way. This is a weed growing up in some common milkweed. It was kind of back out of the way. You didn't really look at it. It just added texture to the stand until it got to the point where I could see that it was going to flower. And I know how quickly, I don't know what this thing's called, but I know how quickly it goes from flower to seed. So then I got it out of the ground. Tools. Excuse me. Tools. This is these Dutch hoes. You use them standing up. You shouldn't even have to bend over that much to use one. It's a bad habit of mine. But you use them standing up. And look how precisely you can work. This is this little herb garden I showed you earlier. This is probably second weeding of the year in June. And you can just root things out and work very close. Over here to the left, there's a little oregano plant in there, and it's completely surrounded by weeds. But while standing on the lawn, I can just clear all that out of there. They're really nice hoes to work with. I've had one of these things on my whole life. That dandelion, you just turn the hoe up on end and kind of pop it out of the ground. You can't even see what I did, but they're great hoes. You see, I double sheath a pruner with a soil knife. What does a pruner got to do with weeding? Little trees. This is a Siberian elm. Plunge your pruner in the ground, snip it off an inch below ground level. It's terminated. It's not coming back. The red line there is the soil line. And I could have easily, this is a small enough tree, I could easily pull the whole thing out of the ground, but that's more disturbance and brings more weeds. So you don't want to do that. What's something like this? Looks like a mess. What's all that grass growing in there? You can see there's some purple coneflower there, and that other plant, it turns out, as you look at it a little closer, is liatris. So all those plants can be this gorgeous if they have room. But you look at this, and the one thing you know for sure is you got too many of them. This is a spot where I saw some penstemons coming up, and there were obviously too many of them. And this was a day when I was maintaining tens of thousands of square feet, and this is 1 square foot. And I would have loved to go and get some containers and pot these up and, you know, spread them around, water them in somewhere. I didn't have that kind of time. So I just took my hoe, this is with one hand because I'm holding the phone with the other, in 4 or 5 seconds, thin it out, move back, you know, I'll come back in 2 weeks and spend another 4 or 5 seconds on that 1 square foot and maybe thin it out a little bit. But someday there's going to be a nice little stand of penstemons there. And I think there is right now. But you want to deal with these things when they're small, get them while they're little. When you let problems get big, then it takes more soil disturbance to fix them, and everything is just harder. And just don't worry about all the little details. Cleanups? No, don't you dare. Cut back. And you don't even need to cut back all that much stuff. And leave the leaves. Why do you want to leave the leaves? Look at this beautiful thing. This is a comma butterfly that overwinters as an adult in the leaf litter. And how I found this, that's a whole nother story. But these things in the spring, they're a generalist. Their caterpillars eat the leaves of trees, just about any kind of native tree. So as soon as the first trees start leafing out, they're going to breed, fly up in those trees, and lay eggs. And those eggs are going to go into the caterpillars that feed the first batch of baby birds in the spring. I wrote to Doug Tallamy one time because he's a really nice guy and will answer questions. I said, how is it I'm seeing all these birds that have already raised young and I've barely seen a butterfly yet this year? He said, the butterflies get the press, the moths do the heavy lifting. You don't see them. Yeah, so that's that guy. Doug sent me these pictures of a Luna moth. That's the cocoon in leaf litter. You'll never see that. There's, you know, tell me that a rake's better than a blower. It's, you know, a matter of degree. You're still going to destroy those things. This is at the Leary Garden when they were doing cutback. I just recently, in the past week, thought of something. I was cleaning up my front yard and a little bit, and I said, I wonder if I just took all the stems that were leaning over at weird angles or laying on the ground, creating a messy looking stuff. I wonder if I cleaned those up, but left all the vertical stuff. I wonder if the vertical stuff supports more life, like bees nesting in them. So I wrote to Heather Holm and asked her, do you find bees in the vertical stems and the tip stems and the laying down stems? She said, the more vertical, the better. And if you just go through and clean out just the tipped over stuff in your garden, it'll look so much prettier because you just have those vertical lines. I did that and I might be onto something. We'll see. That's just anecdotal from Heather, but she has a lot of observation. This is the incomparable Horacio Suarez taking a huge panicum switchgrass down to a pile of mulch in 1 minute and 22 seconds. I have a video of this. This is just some film. Some stills out of that. But he did this with a weed whacker. My preferred tool is a electric powered hedge trimmer, battery powered. Just cut it off in 4-inch segments, and the garden's mulched. You're done. You can walk away. That Horacio took probably a half an hour. There were 10 of those big panicums in this bed. Took a half an hour, knocked everything down. You're not hauling anything off, not hauling anything in. All that expense that landscapers want to stick you with, you don't have to worry about it. It's all right there. And we're getting close to the end of this thing. Other gardens are your best resource. Well, duh. That's why you guys belong to Wild Ones, right?
Right.
Because, the gardeners are the ones that, they help each other. You can learn so much. And I recently found out that there's a long tradition of that in our country. This woman, I don't know if you ever heard of Andrea Wolf. She wrote a book on Alexander von Humboldt a few years ago. She did a deep dive into the letters of the first 4 presidents. The #1 topic by far of all the topics that they talk about is horticulture. And the picture, as you read these letters, the picture that emerges is that everything they did, from first conceptualizing independence through actually having to govern, took up their adult lives. They did all that stuff so they could go home and garden, because that's what they wanted to do. And because they wanted us to be able to go home and garden. And Washington in particular said that he believed the flora of North America would provide for great prosperity for the people. And so that's what gardeners do, is they communicate with each other. They help each other learn tricks. Many of you have been to the seminar in McHenry County, the WPPC. One program that they have that I just always have to plug when I talk to people is their mentoring program, where an experienced gardener takes someone else under their wing, helps them get their first garden design and the plants purchased. They don't help do the work, but I love the model because it has the potential for this exponential growth of just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we happen to need that. So models like that are great. They do work days, consultations with people about, because she thinks maybe she has an editing issue here. And sweet lady, and she has beautiful gardens, but this one had gotten out of control, but nobody had ever given her permission to pull plants out of her garden. And when we did, it was very liberating for her. She was really happy. Yeah, and they have this mentoring program that I talked about. This is a little story I'd like to leave you with. Well, I have one more thing after this, but Trout Valley. Are you guys familiar with Trout Valley? It's a little village adjacent to Cary that was 100 years ago was the estate of John Hertz, who was huge in transportation. He owned bus lines, he owned subways. He started a rental car company. And he had 270 some acres there. And he hired Jens Jensen. There's a stream that ran through that's fed by a fen system that's along this hillside. And he hired Jens Jensen to develop a series of trout ponds along this stream. And with time, the area eventually changed hands, got subdivided nicely, big, big properties, friendly people. I used to do a lot of work in Trout Valley doing maintenance in gardens. And with time, after being subdivided, the natural areas weren't being maintained, and the water quality in the trout ponds started deteriorating. And so they realized they had to clean up the fen. The fen was all overgrown with buckthorn and honeysuckle. So they went to work together as a group, and the place became so beautiful that they started having public events. And this, everybody remember that mythical change of consciousness that's going to happen with native plants, where people's ideas of what's beautiful is going to change. We've been talking about this for decades now. They started having these public events, and people started learning what it did to remove the invasive stuff from these properties. And clients of mine who I'd been talking to about honeysuckle for years, and they just been looking at me funny, they started bringing it up. So I feel like I've experienced a little of that mythical change of consciousness that we all want to experience. And maybe it's a real thing. Maybe it is. All right. And the heart of all this is that you have a personal relationship with this place that you're taking care of. And that, so that when you look at it, this is exactly the same picture, just different temporally, same plant, just at a slightly different time. And that it's all those different things when you look at one part of it temporally. And when you see those little red tips, this is royal catchfly, Silene regia, which is threatened or endangered in every state within its native range, but is incredibly easy to grow in a garden. It's a beautiful plant. And when I see those little tips, I know that the next morning before the sun comes up, that those flowers are going to be open, and there will be a hummingbird on them reliably. When the first bud opens, there's a hummingbird there that morning. These aren't my pictures. These are taken by Pam Carlson, who has such an amazing personal relationship with her 50 by 100 foot backyard within a stone's throw of the intersection of the Kennedy and Harlem, right underneath where the airplanes land. She's been gardening for birds for 25 years and has documented over 120 different species of birds in that little tiny place. She's had woodcocks spend the day. It's amazing because of that relationship. And as you develop that, you get to appreciate when you see all that weedy looking stuff that has the potential to become these magnificent beasts that then color up and bring us flying flowers. We called these flutterbys when I was a kid. I always think that was a better name. And that this picture and those are just two different manifestations of the whole thing. You start enjoying the whole thing as a whole, and that every spring, really soon, within a matter of weeks, the shooting stars are going to come up and put on a show. And that every fall, you're going to get just unimaginable variety of hues, and the autumn frosts and the winter snows and rebirth. And Wendell Berry left us with this that I stole from somebody. Care of the earth is our most ancient, most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. To cherish what remains of it and to foster its renewal is our only legitimate hope. Well, I'm not going to let Wendell have the last word on this. Our most pleasing responsibility, I do agree 100%. Only legitimate hope. I think there are some others. I think this is one of them. I urge people to always stop at lemonade stands. And that's it. Okay, what have we got for questions? Yes.
We have so many, but I'll keep it to one. Our lot line, it's like double, and it's
all trees, like just scrub trees from when it was a farm, you know how they divide their farms with those scrub tree lines, and we have a lot of that,
Uh-huh.
and we haven't maintained it very well, so a lot of stuff is falling down in there. And we want to run a chipper shredder. So what is the best way to do that? Do you pull it all out and put it in one pile, or?
Oh, boy, now you're talking ecological restoration. I'm a gardener. It's a lot of work. There are tools. There is a tool called a Ficon mower that you would have to hire somebody to bring that will just chew up everything in the spot on spot. I just recently learned a buckthorn method that should work on really most trees. This park in Minneapolis used it, and what they did was they went through heavily invaded buckthorn honeysuckle forest. They went through and cut everything off at chest height, and then everything below that they cut off. So they just had all these 4-foot stumps, and then for 2 years they would come through, and I imagine using a machete. I think that would be the best tool for this. Any new growth on that 4-foot stump, you cut it off, and you do that twice a year for 2 years. And then in the 3rd year, you come back and you just push the trees over, because the root systems have sacrificed over and over and over to support this, and you can just push them over. And the day that they push the trees over is the day that they plant. So when you do that soil disturbance, you get the seeds or plants, whatever you're putting in, and it seems to work. Just learned about that in the last month. But yeah, that's hard. It's a lot of work. There's.
Yeah, we plan on doing it in segments like a year,
Mhm.
but there's a lot of little trees that grow up in there that we want to get rid of, and because it's looking through all the other trees, and so stuff's starting to fall down.
Yeah. Anybody else?
What was the name of the native Pachysandra?
Allegheny spurge. Yeah, it's Pachysandra is the genus name. I'm not sure what which one it is. But yeah, it's called Allegheny spurge. Any more questions? Did you have anything online? Any questions? Oh, you're looking.
Yes, I really hope. Yeah, thank you. We did record the presentation, so it'll be on Start in Your Yard. Is that right? Yeah. So it will be recorded if you want to go back to it. So if there are questions, just go on.
Yes.
I have a wooded lot in the middle of Geneva, which is about 150 by 100 feet lot. It has no grass. It has a creek coming through it. We bought it 20 years ago. It was all weeds and trees and buckthorn and terrible stuff. So over 20 years, the first thing we did was get a tree diversity. We worked hard to get out the box elder, the buckthorn, the junk trees, and slowly over about 6 years planted, the bur oaks and just a diversity. So we had a lot of different kinds of trees. So that was the first thing. Then the second thing was to get some soil along the curbs that are conducive to growing things, because everything else was full of roots and wasn't really doing very well. So we've accomplished a lot of ground covers. And so that has really helped because it's slopey and we got a lot of slopes. So we need the ground covers to hold the erosion. We never water because we don't need to with the creek. So we're trying to do more native gardening, especially along the curbs where I have my color, my edge. That's where my color is. I have a lot of ephemerals in the woods that have May-apples and trillium and things like that, which is wonderful. But the edges, so getting some of these things to go on the edges. I have a lot of brown-eyed Susans love it. The wild geraniums love it. Cranesbill, things like that. But it's hard to figure out how to get things in clumps by the trees. And just how to lay it out. So I've really enjoyed your presentation with the clumping, because I think I'm stretching things out too much, doing a plant, a plant, a plant, a plant, instead of bunches. So that was very helpful. And so do you have a source for some of these native plants? I mean, I would love to have friends who would share plants. That would.
Right.
Yeah. But
That you know, certain plants like prairie smoke, why do any of, if we get serious about this in 5 years, why should anybody ever spend a dime on prairie smoke? Because you can just divide it and divide it and divide it and divide it. And the Greater King County Native Plant Sale, I happen to
I'm gonna be gone.
experience, which I experienced last year and was excellent.
So, where our plant sale is May 30th. Our plant sale is May 13th. Forest Preserve District of King County Foundation is having theirs on April 29th. St. Charles Park District is having theirs first weekend in June, I believe it is.
Oh, okay. So some of those are a little later. Are those on the wild ones?
Not yet, but I can.
That would be handy.
April 29th, it's a Creek Bend for the Forest Preserve District of King County. There also, and Ken mentioned Possibility Place at our plant sale. We have Possibility Place. That's one of them, and thanks for Majestic Oaks, which I agree. We also, if you go to Wasco Nursery.
Oh, I go there all the time. Matt's awesome. He helped me with my tree diversity, and we walked the fields and found specific trees.
They have plants there from Midwest ground covers during the summer too. A little more expensive then, but
Yeah, it is a little more expensive.
and we also get Taylor Restoration Nursery, RES, which is in Broadhead, Wisconsin. We get our plants there, and you can call them and go up and buy them. Same with Possibility Place. You can't just go. You have to call them, but you can go there and buy things too.
Well, if you would put some of those resources on the website or whatever, the newsletter, that would be
They're
great.
on startinyouryard.com.
Okay. Oh, good. Then I will have that then. Because it's hard to think about what's an edge plant, because I have sun maybe on those plants, maybe 2 hours, maybe 3. And so I have to be really careful as to what I try a lot of things that don't make it, and it gets a little expensive. So I'm trying to find plants that are more suited to the edge.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ken.
edges can be a little difficult to deal with sometimes. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, this guy back here.
Last fall, I raked all of my leaves into my garden. I was saving myself the work of bagging them up and hauling them to curb. Should I leave all those leaves now?
Yeah, well,
Should I rake them up at all?
How deep are they in your garden?
I'm sorry. Oh, just 4 or 5 inches.
Oh, yeah, no problem. No problem. Think of, there didn't used to be rakes, and the woods did just fine. And that's if you have leaves blow up, pile a foot high against your house, that's one thing, but in your garden, no problem. Yeah, just leave them. Stuff will grow. And people talk about, oh, well, oak trees, because they have the tannins in them, you can't, that they're going to kill your plants, or if you have walnut leaves, they're going to kill your plants. And that doesn't, it doesn't. It does just fine. Question? I mean, how deep is it? Yeah, it'll go away. It'll decompose. But yeah, leaves are the best thing. What I do with the neighbor's leaves.
The question was about how much, if you should leave the mulch there.
Yeah. The leaves that I gather, all the life that's in those leaves that are along the street, that stuff's all going to die anyway. But the more we can just leave the leaves completely alone. The leaves on my lawn, I just mow the lawn several times and chop them all up. I don't have very much lawn. Yes.
In terms of trying to help the things that overwinter in the leaves, the ones that do fall on the lawn, I've been using the blower to blow it back like into the beds and borders where I've actually them. But since you've talked to Talamy, what's the best way to not hurt them? Is a rake better? Is a blower better?
You mean that fall out on the lawn?
Yeah,
Yeah.
place where you can't leave them, right?
You mean you,
Like if you want, I don't want to get rid of the leaves,
uh-huh,
but I
yeah.
want to put them someplace. that's
And
usually-
you know, that's funny. I hadn't even thought of it from that angle. From that angle, a blower actually makes more sense than a rake because you're probably gonna kill less things.
That's what I thought.
The thing in my yard, the things that land on the grass are gonna get mowed anyway. So, but the yeah, getting them out of there. Yeah, the thing is just to get rid of all the lawn, then we don't have to worry about that, right?
I have a
You
lot
know?
of lawns still.
You know, they're useful for certain things, for a dog, for a kid, for a place to park your car temporarily. You know, we don't have curbs in my neighborhood and I tell everybody, you know, don't park on the street. There are kids who walk on that street. Get over here on the lawn. That's why it's there. But any other questions? Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, she says she does get leaves piled up deep against her house and against the fence and different things in the yard. And how long in the spring should she wait before cleaning those up?
Or even to cut back stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And that's always a problem. I would think that some of the things, if you can possibly, you know, leave them until, you know, we're getting warmer weather and, you know, trees are starting to leaf out and stuff, that would be better. You know, as far as cutting stuff back, there was this big thing got started a couple of years ago about 50 degrees. 50 degrees is magical, and then you can go cut everything. When Heather Holm spoke in Crystal Lake, I asked her that, and she said, I don't know where that came from. You know, the more you can just leave stuff alone, the better. And the thing about stems that we want to encourage beetles or different bees to use to lay eggs in, sometimes they don't use those until they're 2 or 3 years old. Talamy advocates cutting stuff off at the ground and then having a place in your yard where you can just leave them standing up. I don't know if that works or not. I stick them back in bushes and stuff and leave them standing up.
What about putting them in a compost pile so they can at least get out when they hatch?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just, you know, don't put them out on the curb and have them haul them off. If you can just put the stuff somewhere, you know. Yes.
Someone asked if, he has about 30 horsetail plants growing in his yard. It's about triple. Are they, from last year, are they invasive?
I mean, it's a native plant, you know, depending on your definition. Some people say you can't call that invasive. They can be very aggressive. If he has a wet place, he must have a wet place. And I would advocate find other things that like a really wet place and try to soak up some of that moisture. Yeah.
Or you can dry them out and use them medicinal. Oh. Yeah, they're high in silica.
Oh, yeah.
They're high in silica. I actually buy more silk capsules.
What is the best time to divide plants?
What is the best time to divide plants? Spring and fall. You know, some plants it really doesn't matter. You know, something like that Robbins plantain I showed you, you know, because they really do form separate plants, and you could do that anytime when it's not 105 out. Would probably just work just fine. But spring and fall is the easiest of them on them, and they take off and grow the best.
And this person asked, she's had
she or he, I'm sorry, is trying to eliminate mint, which spreads. It's a yearly challenge. Is there an easier way to get rid of that?
Yeah, never let mint touch the ground. Just don't, just say no. That's tough. That's really tough. That green wood chip idea might work on that. I've never tried that on mint. Sorry. Yes.
And I agree with what you said with regard to the goldenrod, though I will argue a little bit that I don't mind having the Canadian and Missouri. I think mine's Canada. But I cut it down about twice during the course of summer, so it ends up, it's only about 3 feet high. Admittedly, I have to dig some, both of those rhizomes once in a while, but man, by the time they're blooming, that backyard is fabulous.
Oh, yeah. And
The arrow, goldenrod.
yeah, so he was commenting that he has a more conciliatory attitude towards Canada goldenrod than I have. And you're right, it can be managed, and cutting it down on a regular, if you cut them down in June, cut them to the ground, and then do it again later in the year, cut them in the ground, it takes so much energy out of the colony that it behaves itself better.
That extends to the other perennials too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that method will help manage them. And yeah, if you find any, these are all just my observations and my experiences, and that's not to say I'm right about a lot of this. I change my mind on stuff all the time, but goldenrod, the aggressive goldenrods do, they're sure easy to maintain. Anybody else? Oh,
I was gonna mention that you did the black plastic. I've done
Mhm.
clear, which works really well in the heat of summer.
Uh-huh.
The heat gets in there.
right.
You
Yeah,
have to wet it first.
Uh-huh.
Before you put it down. but it
right.
works
And
really
you
well.
kind of steam everything out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a month in the heat of summer, that's all you need.
Hmm. Yeah, she's talking for people at home. She's talking about, are we still going out to the outside world?
I had a field of mint I transplanted, and I got a few mint rhizomes, and I ended up with a field of it. I could not get rid of it. I did the newspaper method, about 4 layers of newspaper, and put mulch on it.
That won't work.
It did. I have no more mint. It worked, and I left it for 2 years, and I have no more mint there. Now, I took
Well-
some, put in a pot now. I only grow it in pots.
Wow.
Paper method really worked, where was around trees and things, so I couldn't do much else.
Uh-huh. Well, that's wonderful. Congratulations.
Mary Alice wants to say a few words about. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Quick announcement. Hi, I'm Mary Alice. Sonic,
Right into
does it work?
Yeah.
Speak right into it. Speak right into it.
Yes, I just want to say that I have requested 120 free oak trees from Living Lands and Waters once again this year. Actually fewer than the last couple of years, and we will be giving those away in April. I like to get them dispersed within a couple of weeks so they get in the ground. Most of them are bur oak. There are also red oak and swamp white, as well as some shagbark hickories, and they're bare root. I've been requesting them for many years, and they've done very well when we've planted. So please keep this in mind if you want any free oak trees or shagbark hickory, and we will make an announcement when they come in. I'll be having them at my house and then just communicating with people by email so they can request specific numbers and species and then come and pick them up from my front porch.
Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And thank you. We did much better, I think, online this time. Yes. So thank you all. This was a wonderful presentation, and it's been recorded, so it'll be on Starting Your Yard, right? Not the library. So we'll get to see you next time. So thank you for sticking with us. Bye, and thank you for
Yeah, it'll be on, yeah, I sent it to yours.